Thank you, Devika, for that lovely introduction. And thank you primarily, first of all, to the wonderful Vivan Sundaram, without whom and without Devika Dwayne Singh, I would not be here today. It's my first time to India, and I am enchanted and thrilled, and sorry that it's taken me so long to get here, but I am so happy to be here. So I'm going to begin a lecture that will not be including Indian photography. I was instructed that there are many people here today that know a lot more about Indian photography than I do. So I am going to begin looking at how stage and constructive photography grew as a distinct genre within the medium. So a journey through photography from its Western origins will show how it played its part from its invention. Now I've lost, here we are. I think we may have lost some subtlety in, oh, this is not working. Because what I'm showing here first is the Reverend Calvert Richard Jones. He was a great friend and collaborator with Fox Talbot. And this was the first picture that I could find that showed a very clear intervention, because in the negative, you'll see that there's, in fact, 5 figures. There's 4 monks in the foreground and a 5th shadowy figure behind them. This may be lost on the screen, but what is very clear is that with a subtle brush of Indian ink, the 5th and less attractive figure has actually been removed from the picture, so we have 4 elegant Capucine monks in 1846 instead of the 5 characters that were initially there. So we continue with Julia Margaret Cameron, who was one of the most important and innovative photographers and a good example of an artist who staged and made her photographs emotive. In 1863, she wrote, "From the first moment I handled my lens with a tender ardour. It has become to me as a living thing, with voice and memory and creative vigour. Her mesmerising portraits and figures, they studies on literary and biblical themes, they were unprecedented in her time. She enlisted friends, family and household staff in her activities, often dressing them as if for the theatre, aiming to capture wisdom, piety or passion. Julia Margaret Cameron said, "My aspirations are to ennoble photography and to secure for it the character and uses of high art by combining the real and the ideal and sacrificing nothing of the truth by all possible devotion to poetry and beauty." So here we have Sir Henry Taylor, and then we have the Mountain Nymph, Sweet Liberty. This is, Sir Henry Taylor was 1867, the Mountain Nymph is 1870, followed by Vivian and Merlin, a very staged combination, in 1874. So following on from Julia Margaret Cameron, I've added 2 of the very famous Lewis Carroll pictures, the Alice Liddell, who was the Alice of Alice in Wonderland, as the beggar maid, and St. George and the Dragon. This is in 1874. So the elaborate 19th century composites of portraits, the addition of clouds to a landscape, hand colouring or tinting to alter or enhance a still life, sometimes also within a domestic location, used interesting placing of heads on unusual shoulders. In this case, this is an image by Kate Goff in 1870, and it's called Untitled. It's from a family album in which she has made her family members ducks. Science, art, and the history of photography have close associations. From the early pioneers and the most in tune with staging, Julia Margaret Cameron and Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland are the most widely known, but the more political or playful uses of constructed imagery, elimination of unwanted figures, or the addition of an exotic or theatrical context, they date back to the very beginning. The pictorialists, however, have a clear historical relevance to the staged and constructed work of today. A movement begun by Henry Peach Robinson in the 1800s, he made elaborate and emotional compositions. He wrote an important book in 1869 called The Pictorial Effect in Photography, being hints on composition and chiaroscuro for photographers. He wrote on the importance of the softening of contour and the spiritual content of an image. To quote Henry Peach Robinson himself, I am far from saying that a photograph must be an actual, literal, and absolute fact, but it must represent truth. Truth and fact are two words, but in art at least they represent two things. A fact is anything that is done or that exists, a reality. Truth is conformity to fact or reality, the absence of falsehood, so that truth in art may exist without an absolute observance of facts. So, in my summary, basically, if an image creates an illusion, the illusion must be convincing. So we have the famous H.P. Robinson Fading Away that he made in 1858. He joined multiple negatives together to form a single image entitled this, Fading Away. It's perceived to be the death of a young girl, creating the first form of photomontage. It combined you can see that the figure at the window, the girl, each one of the figures is in fact a separate negative brought together. It was the cause of a major scandal, and it was deemed a very vulgar invasion of privacy and flagrant voyeurism. But in fact, of course, the girl was not a dying girl at all. Stieglitz in the USA took up the pictorialist mantle and stated atmosphere is the medium through which we see all things. Atmosphere softens all lines, it graduates the transition from light to shade. It is essential to the reproduction of the sense of distance. Now, what atmosphere is to nature, tone is to a picture. The pictorialists believed in the crafting and uniqueness of the print, making gum bichromates, bromoils, and photogravure. The emotive content and individuality of expression that the photographer imbued or manipulated to become a work of art, that became a unique print. What was traditionally perceived as photography, being a straightforward record, became something more dreamy, less focused, and with an emotive hue. To add creative luster to a photographic composition was to mark it as pictorialist, to create a work of art. The Pond Moonlight, by Edward Steichen, whose dates were 1879 to 1973. This is sometimes called the Pond Moonrise. It was made in 1904 in New York, near the home of his friend Charles Caffin, an art critic. The photograph features a forest across a pond, with part of the moon appearing over the horizon in a gap in the trees. An early pictorialist photograph, it was created by manually applying gum bichromate layers, giving the final print more than one colour. Only 3 known versions of the Pond Moonlight are still in existence, and as a result of the hand layering of the gum layers, it makes each one unique. In February, incidentally, a print of this photograph sold for $2.9 million, at the time the highest price ever paid for a photograph at auction. The gentleness and softening of the pictorialist tradition began to ebb in favour of modernism in the 1940s. The evocative, emotional print gave way to a much more hard-edged modernism. This was a global movement that sought a new alignment with the experience and values of modern industrial life, a movement that encompassed literature, photography, and architecture. Modernism is a general term used to encompass trends in photography from roughly 1910 to 1950, when photographers began to produce works with a sharp focus and an emphasis on formal qualities, exploiting rather than obscuring the camera as an essentially mechanical and technological tool. This is a picture by Florence Henry. Her dates are 1893 to 1982, and this portrait is in 1928. Experimenting with abstraction, dramatic vantage points, and the new technical processes, avant-garde artist Florence Henry and the modernists reinvented photography, lauding it as the art form for the machine age. She was a remarkable woman whose bold photographs undervalued but reaffirm her place in the history of modern photography. A truly cosmopolitan figure, Florence-Henri studied at Hans Hofmann's art school in Munich, with Fernand Léger in Paris, and at the Bauhaus. By 1928, Henri had established her own photography studio and was quickly becoming an award-winning artist. In her inventive still lives and architectural compositions, Henri was a vibrant artist at the centre of the avant-garde. The Dadaists, a movement which mirrored the meaningless of life at the turn of the 20th century, was the precursor to Surrealism. The Dadaists were angry. Their aesthetic performative art was to shock. They mirrored the scorn and disgust of the world heading towards war. It propelled them to create their art. André Breton, the charismatic leader of the Surrealists, was astute in noting that Surrealism explores the other side of the real. His own collages, montages, and poem objects highlight the uninterrupted becoming of any object. They do not illuminate real conflicts of ideological and material interest between competing social and political forces. Surrealism interrogated the latent content of everyday life, questioning the givenness of things, and expressed the disorientation that modernity produced in the aftermath of World War I. Apolitical, Surrealism generated a sense of fun and wonder in the audience. Its artists still evoke a sense of discomfort with reality and the feeling that things can be different. Surrealism may foster a psychological or subterranean desire for change. Neither a dialectical foundation nor revolutionary politics is necessary in order to exercise the imagination, so Surrealist art offers its own reward and takes another step towards the playful, the performed, and the post-production in photography. I would rather photograph an idea rather than an object, and a dream rather than an idea, said Man Ray in 1926. He was on the edge of the Surrealist group. He went on to make rayographs without a camera by placing objects directly onto photosensitized paper and exposing it to light. These unique visionary still lives, which hover between the abstract and the representational, revealed a new way of seeing and constructing an image. With Lee Miller, Man Ray also created the solarized print, creating a halo of silver light around the subject. I have on the screen his picture of Lee Miller's lips. Lee Miller was an artist in her own right, but she worked with Man Ray and he photographed her a lot. And on the next slide, I show about how he used Lee Miller's lips in so many different ways. And now this is Dora Maar. Dora Maar was a provocative and interesting surrealist artist. This is one of her photo montages, which became celebrated icons of surrealism, although she is less known than her male counterparts. Her photography and painting was seminal to the movement, and her relationship with Pablo Picasso had a profound effect on both their careers. The digital development in performative and constructive photography has taken some of the secretive skills out of the darkroom. The solitary photographer working magic and alchemy in the darkroom has been brought into the light. Technology presents easier and endless opportunities to evoke subjective states of mind and the creation of ideas and narrative, although it has been proven these magical, mysterious manipulations existed from the start. Oh, thank you. Good idea. We are now a sophisticated audience. We understand and accept that the process of photography has been demystified. We have a rationale that does not always believe the evidence presented, the picture as we first read it. The collaging or montaging of images, the splicing of negatives and doubling up to create a composite or unusual effect can now largely be done post-production and in a light room. There are dreamlike scenarios, there are surreal imaginary worlds, there are the serious and political, and there are works that consciously and sometimes humorously highlight the mutability of the photographic image to good end. For a long time, the perception was that a photograph represented a truth. It was a document, or that it represented a reality. It is now considered a conduit or a conveyor of images to be read. Importantly, and although at a slight diversion from the rest of my talk, I would like to show this one famous war photograph. It's by Robert Capa, the moment at which a bullet hits and kills during the Spanish Civil War. Magnum Photos represents to many the fundamental agency for documentary truth. It was begun by Henri Cartier-Bresson with George Roger, Robert Capa, and David Seymour Chim, who loosely divided up the world into a quarter each, with Cartier-Bresson famously making landmark photographs in India. All Magnum images were to be seen full frame, and captions written by the photographer had to be reproduced with the fierce proviso that the youth was truthful and adhered to. Magnum and documentary photography made seminal images and were at the forefront of the expansion of the printed image. The newspapers, magazines, and books their pictures were seen in were seized upon as truth and evidence of what is real. Yet The Falling Soldier by Robert Capa, entitled Loyalist Militiaman at the Moment of Death, Cerro Muriano, September the 5th, 1936, was claimed to depict the death of a Republican Iberian Federation of Libertarian youth during the Spanish Civil War. It appears to show the moment of death. Following its publication, the photograph was acclaimed as the greatest war photograph ever taken, but since the 1970s there have been significant doubts as to the authenticity of location, identity of the subject, and the discovery of staged photographs taken at the same time and place. So The Falling Soldier now takes its place amongst, possibly, the staged and constructed photographs. To declare and distinguish the evidence within photography's role and how it was fundamental to the way it was understood and continues to change requires examination on an almost daily basis. The psychoanalytical concepts of fantasy and the unconscious were first started to use the power of staged and constructed photography began in the 20s and 30s. Walter Benjamin in 1936 speaks of the optical unconscious, the ability of photography to open up spaces that previously only existed in dreams, things that had never consciously been seen, let alone reproduced. It's important that the next slide also be seen. This is not often, we'll go back one, and this is not so often well known. Artists like Yves Klein, who beguiled his admirers with the prospect of transcending the material earthly life. So now we leap to David Hockney, who was a student at the Royal College of Art, I think, like Vivan, and he went on to make joiners with using Polaroids in the 1970s. Instant photography was not that new. It was invented in 1948, but Hockney found an entirely new way to work with the improved instant medium. He wanted to make a visual representation of the real world without using a traditional single-point perspective. If you put together a mosaic of images that are from different vantage points, you eradicate the vanishing point and present a photographic image that flouts conventional perspective. And we move on to a series of 3 slides, all by Dwayne Michaels, a very beautiful series called The Spirit Leaves the Body that he made in 1968. Dwayne Michaels is still a seminal figure in stage photography. He was very innovative in his use of photo sequences, and he often incorporated text to examine emotion and philosophy. He was born in 1932, and Jerry Yulesman in 1934, both of whom made fantastical pictures by exploring the inner landscapes of their own imaginations. They highlight the malleability of the camera image. They ask you to accept the truth of what is before you, consciously winning your suspension of disbelief. Jerry Yulesman made his very last image with digital technology, but he felt that his multi-layered imagery, his time that he spent in the darkroom, was his special contribution to photography. He's quoted as saying that his creative process remains intricately linked to the alchemy of the darkroom. The desire for optical realism has, in its way, been a motivation to manipulate images. Photographers often altered their pictures to make them appear more true, but in the 20th century, the photographers and artists used this for an untrue effect. André Cortège. Oh, that's interesting. We might come back to André Cortège, and we will skip to Angus Mcbain, who was a set builder, a mask maker, and a photographer. He was born in 1904, but by the mid-1930s, he was the portraitist most sought after by all the London theatres. By 1937, he had begun a series of celebrity portraits that embedded the sitters in extraordinary circumstances, elaborately staged and with flawless technique. It made him a high society star. Mcbain, a perfect gentleman, was a photographer who played with light and shadow and became the epitome of flamboyant wit and camp. Mcbain's revival in the 1980s, his early work and art glamorously at odds with the unformed aesthetics of hippies and punks alike. There is a lineage, very English, ambiguously modern, devoted to glamour as pure effrontery, that runs from Mcbain's mainstream queer surrealism to the art, music and film of that era. And here we've gone back now to this is André Cortège's nudes, which are beautiful, elongated, and both André Cortège and Bill Brandt used their own imagination, but they used the camera and they used the darkroom to actually make quite painterly, quite sculptural, and quite exotic nudes that changed the public's perception of who these photographers were. They were no longer documentary photographers, but they were creating work of their own. And now we get to Ouija. Peter Galassi, who is a great curator at MoMA in New York, said, "These artists make a world of engaging mischief. The appealing wit of their pseudo-documents and photographic conundrums undermine the presumed reliability of photographic fact." Ouija famously beat the New York police to the scene of a crime, but in the 50s and 60s he experimented with film and panoramic photographs. He made photo distortions and photography through prisms. Using a plastic lens, he made a famous Marilyn Monroe photograph in which her face is grotesquely distorted yet still recognizable. His own self-portrait and that of Johnson for president speak for themselves. And now we go back to Angus Mcbain. So this is a picture of Binky Beaumont, a portrait of Emlyn Williams and Angela Baddeley he made in 1947. And this is a self-portrait. And if you look carefully, you can see that there's 3 self-portraits. One taking the picture, one standing in front of the camera, and himself nude within the camera. I go on now to Claude Cahun, who grappled with her gender identity her entire life. Her photographs are androgynous, her work unorthodox and eccentric. The surrealists frequently used doubling of the eyes or lips or head, but Claude Cahun used her own head, her own self, her own body to reflect her inner struggle. The surrealists fully appreciated the genius of Claude Cahun and took her to their heart. Her beautiful work continues to exert a strength and emotive quality, inspiring many contemporary photographers. Described in her own words as a hunt through a combination of text and imagery, Cahun's exploration of self is relentless and at times unsettling. From circus performer clothed in layers of artifice to a stripped-down Buddhist monk grounded by integrity, Cahun was engaged in an ongoing dialogue with multiplicity. Tragically in line with the fragmentary nature of her outlook, much of her work was destroyed following her arrest and subsequent imprisonment for resistance against the Nazis. This one is entitled "What Do You Want From Me?" and is dated 1929. So Madame Yvonne born Yvonne Cumbers Middleton, was a groundbreaking society portrait photographer in 1920s Britain, who built a glittering reputation as a photographer under the exotic moniker Madame Yvonne. A former suffragette and women's liberationist, she was a feisty, independent businesswoman, a visionary artist, an early exponent of Vivex colour photography. Her portraits of the it girls and boys of the day grace the glossy pages of Tattler, People and Sketch, and appear to a modern standpoint like freeze frames of a devil-may-care golden era of celebrity and society. Anybody who was anybody, from Barbara Cartland to Noel Coward, clamoured to be immortalised under her quirky lens in the 30s. Colour photography was seen as rather vulgar to a public accustomed to the flattering shades of black and white, but Yvonne's pioneering experimentation with the ethereal washes of Vivex helped convert opinion to brighter hues. Her surrealist, possibly Man Ray-inspired portraits received considerable acclaim, and Yvonne is most famous for Goddesses, a series of theatrically staged colour photographs depicting mythological figures such as Europa and Medusa. Here we have the Lady Millbank as Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons in 1935. We now jump to Arthur Tress, who was born in 1940. Arthur Tress is a master storyteller who first gained recognition with his hauntingly beautiful book, The Dream Collector, published in 1972. The book was a challenge to the photographic ethos of its time. The turbulent 60s and 70s were a golden age for photojournalists who were energized by war and social change. These photographers found their truths in city streets and jungle frontlines, but instead of roaming the streets finding a Cartier-Bresson serendipitous decisive moment, Tress began to manipulate scenes and stage pictures to create fantastical images that were both real and unreal. To quote him, "It was a moment in my own artistic trajectory where I needed to move away from the prevalent documentary realism and street shooting of the 60s into new areas of internal self-exploration. I began doing what's called staged photography. This is around 1970, and that was kind of unusual for the time." I can hear his voice saying that as I read it. So the first one is Stefan Brecht. It's a portrait of bride and groom, and it's in New York in 1970. This is 1971. It's called Flood Dream, and it's in Ocean City in New Jersey. And this, I think, I felt very strongly when I was looking for pictures for this lecture that this seemed to fit very much the feeling of the archive that I was coming to visit. This is called Ultraviolet. It's in New York City. And I move on to Zanele Mahoney, who was born in 1972. Mahoney has used photography as a tool to subvert the typical representations of African Americans. She has created an archive of photos working to dismantle dominant, pre-existing conceptions of her subjects. Through her interpretations, she hopes to document the journey of the African gay community as a record for future generations. She captures the moment without negativity or the violence, portraying the LGBTQI community as individuals and as a whole to encourage unity. South African and a self-titled visual activist, Zanele Mahoney has gained international recognition for her direct, powerful imagery. She devoted years to a body of work called Faces and Phases, 2006 to 2016, in which she directed her camera towards members of the black, lesbian and trans community in South Africa. Mahoney has exposed herself to innumerable acts of aggression and violence during the course of her career. Despite this, she continues to pursue her work, in part to insist on a visual history and visibility for members of her long-overlooked community. Lately, self-portraiture, a picture taken every day, has taken on new prominence in her work. The body of work Somnyama Somnyama Ngonyama, Hail the Dark Lioness, has been exhibited internationally to much acclaim. We start with Faces and Phases. And the last one, is Zanelli's Somnyama Nigonyama, Hail the Dark Lioness. So this is Zanelli Mahoney. And I continue with Jeff Wall, a Canadian artist best known for his large-scale backlit Cibachrome photographs and art history writing. Wall has been a key figure in Vancouver's art scene since the early 1970s and is now a global icon of the art world. Wall has said the only way to continue in the spirit of the avant-garde is to experiment with your relation to tradition. In 1977, during a visit to the Prado in Madrid, he was moved by the paintings of Velázquez and Goya. He felt that due to what he saw as the dominance of photography and film, it was no longer possible for modern artists to paint like the great masters. Seeking a new method to represent everyday life pictorially, Wall found a suitable medium in advertising hoarding light boxes and made his first backlit transparencies in 1978. Wall calls his photographs after Charles Baudelaire prose poems, a description that emphasizes how each picture should be experienced rather than used to illustrate a predetermined idea or a specific narrative. His pictures may depict an instant and a scenario, but the before and after that moment are left completely unknown, allowing them to remain open to multiple interpretations. The prose poem format allows any truth claims of the photograph, the facts that we expect from journalistic photography, to remain suspended. Wall believes that in that suspension, the viewer experiences pleasure. In addition to the light boxes, Wall has made, since 1996, black and white prints and large-scale colour inkjet photographs. So we have here the Jeff Wall and Delacroix, the death of Sardanapalus in 1827 and the destroyed room in 1978. And we have Manet, A Bar at the Folies Bergère, and Jeff Wall, Picture for Women, 1979. And from Jeff Wall, we move to Cindy Sherman, widely recognised as one of the most important and influential artists in contemporary art. Throughout her career, she has presented a sustained, eloquent and provocative exploration of the construction of contemporary identity and the nature of representation. She draws from the unlimited supply of images from movies, TV, magazines, the internet and art history. Working as her own model for more than 30 years, Sherman has captured herself in a range of guises and personas which are in turn amusing and disturbing, distasteful and affecting. To create her photographs, she assumes multiple roles of photographer, model, makeup artist, hairdresser, stylist, and wardrobe mistress. With an arsenal of wigs, costumes, makeup, prosthetics, and props, Sherman has deftly altered her physique and surroundings to create a myriad of intriguing portraits and characters, from screen siren to clown to aging socialite. These are all untitled from the year 2000. And from Cindy Sherman, I moved to Hannah Starkey, born in 1971. She's Irish. She also attended the Royal College of Art, and it was whilst there she began looking directly at women's experience. And she's now shifted, that was in the 1990s that she was at the Royal College, she's now shifted towards the contemporary space that we inhabit. She investigates how the controlling urban environment offers little other than artifice and facade. She makes fictional tableau, which plays with expectations of photography as a straightforward and objective medium. Hannah Starkey uses the medium to explore the psychological and physical space of an individual in contemporary Western society. Full of complexities and contradictions, the preconceived photographs are set in highly designed locations, where the figures are often at odds within this space, dislocated and isolated. So the three pictures you've seen date from 1998, 2006, and this last one is January 2013. So Hannah Starkey segues directly into Francesca Woodman. Francesca Woodman had a short life. She lived from 58 to 1981. She's best known for her self-portraits, but her pictures are not self-portraits in the traditional sense. She first started making work while she was at boarding school, and during her short career, she died aged 22, she took 800 pictures in total. European painting and culture had a significant impact on her artistic development. She spent her summers in Italy. Man Ray and Claude Cahun were important to her. Francesca Woodman images strongly convey an underlying sense of human fragility, the fragility exaggerated by the fact that the photographs she made were printed on a very small scale. They're very intimate, and they also have a tragedy. She challenged the idea that the camera fixes time and space. She playfully manipulated light, movement, and photographic effects, and used carefully selected props, vintage clothing, and decaying interiors. Her importance as an innovator is significant, particularly in the context of the 1970s, when the status of photography was still regarded as less important than painting and sculpture. Extraordinary to think a young girl whose output was so limited could have had such a long-lasting effect and continue to be inspirational. She led the way for those who use photography to explore themselves and issues relating to identity. The pictures you see are all 1977 to 1978. This is the last one of Francesca Woodman, and I move now to Joy Gregory. Born in 1959, she studied at Manchester before coming to the Royal College of Art in the 1980s. Her early work, of which this is one, involved elaborate staging and invention. This is called The White Room. This one, you'll see that the portrait of Twiggy is titled Twiggy, is in the back. And the third one that was made also in Manchester is called The Portrait of Judy. But it's the series Cinderella Tours that I think fit the brief of constructed and staged photography. Joy, when back in Jamaica, had asked many of the people, her family and her friends, what was the most significant, where would they like to go, what were their dreams, how could their dreams come true. They all wanted to visit the major sites of Europe. So she has used the golden shoes, like the golden slippers, to transport them around the major sites of Europe. On this grand tour, the shoes are photographed in front of familiar landmarks in the style of so many tourist photographs. So here she is in the Plaza de España in Sevilla. I think you saw before, this is the Bridge of Sighs. And here she is in the Place de Concorde in Paris. So Joy Gregory and Mary Marr are colleagues in London. Mary Marr is a Hungarian photographer. She constructs her photographs from artifacts of her past
It's 6
life.
o'clock.
Oh, okay. So I'll go very, very quickly now. I'm going to speed through this. Okay, Mary Marr, she's a wonderful Hungarian photographer. She constructs her images in the studio, but she uses all of her background, her family, the places, her journeys that she's travelled. She makes series of photographs. This is a particularly beautiful series of 4 images. It's called The Dreamer's Birthday. It's about her mother, who was the perfect communist. This was also, because it's the Dreamer's birthday, the stars are her birthday stars, it's communism, and it's also her family was Jewish, and so it is the Jewish star. They have political connotations, but they're also a beautiful birthday present for her mother. And the next series is called Presents for Susannah. And this was a little girl that lived next to Mary in Wimbledon in London. She was going back to Brazil. They couldn't take anything with them. So these, instead of giving her presents to take back to Brazil, she made 4 photographs of the presents that she wanted to give to her little friend Susannah. So Mary's work always works in series. And I'll move swiftly on to Judy Coburn, who... you think I should slow down again? Okay. Julie is English, her work best defined by its craftsmanship and by the transformation of everyday and found objects into works of art. Through the manipulation of images, Coburn contradicts the generic and mass-produced with something crafted, imbuing her intellectually and physically worn objects with value. Techniques of embroidery and tapestry, her stitching the patterns that feature on found photographs and printed images, draw you into a sculpted journey of labour and creation. Coburn's work challenges the means by which things are seen and visually digested. This is the Conundrum in 2016, and this is Preamble, also 2016. I move on to, from stitching, I move to Alma Hazer. She was born in Germany but studied and lives in the UK. She stumbled upon the term cosmic surgery. It was a mistaken language as she originally meant cosmetic surgery. But it defines the haptic process of enfolding a version of the self over and over again. She first photographs the sitter and makes copious prints. She then folds the prints into intricate origami sculptures and places them on the sitter's face, then rephotographing them. The meditative art of origami is the part she most enjoys, creating a new physiognomy and a portrait of many facets. She calls each of her sitters a patient. This is patient number 1 in 2013. And this is patient number 8 in 2013 from the Cosmic Surgery series. I move on to Sophie Calle, because she, born in Paris in 1953, she is the daughter of oncologist and collector Robert Calle, and her mother was the book critic and press attaché Monique Findler. After graduating from school at 17, Sophie Calle spent the next 7 years travelling through China, America and Mexico. In her practice, she works in photography and installation, combining photos, text and videos to weave narratives of private experience, her own and that of others. Calle's private games began on her return to Paris in the late 1970s, when she decided to follow strangers through the streets. She was aiming to reacquaint herself with the city. She was also in pursuit of how to use photography and was inspired by the text-captioned work of Dwayne Michaels. Her father collected his work. She was very familiar with it. Voyeurism and surveillance became Calle's primary artistic tactics. For her first major project, The Sleepers, she invited complete strangers into her home to spend 8 hours in her bed, while she documented their stay with notes and photographs. She presented the photographs and notes in an installation that contrasted the intimacy of the photographs with the banality of textual descriptions written with an anthropological detachment. The combination of portraiture, conceptual art, and the public exposure of private experiences became hallmarks of Calle's subsequent work. The images here are potent. They're gathered together from a journey to the Far East that she took in the 1980s. She later authorized these images as the daily countdown to the fateful day when she was absolutely rejected by her lover. Small diary entries or thoughts accompany some of these images. It took Sophie Calle a long time to acknowledge or publish these images. They record the unhappiest moments in her entire life. After 15 years of keeping them private, she was able to show this work. So these two, part 1 and part 2, are called Exquisite Pain. Part 1, Countdown to Unhappiness 2000, and part 2, Countdown to Unhappiness 2000. This is followed by Alice Zhu, who is a young graduate in London. She's a photographer and writer. She graduated from Oxford in 2014 and recently completed a master's in photojournalism and documentary photography at London College of Communication. Her work explores the possibilities of communicating interior experience and effect through narrative and non-narrative sequences of images. She's particularly interested in the interaction of photography and the written word. To quote her, photographing on film allows me to cultivate presence with the person or scenario I'm photographing, rather than thinking about the pictures I've already taken. I believe there are important conceptual reasons for working on film. The pictures here are from a series Alice Zhu made in Paris. She absolutely adored Sophie Calle, so set off to Paris and made her own project based on the Calle concept and found a woman who looked like Sophie Calle, and she followed her in exactly the same way that Sophie Calle had followed others. Interestingly, it will be good for you to be able to read the text, but it's interesting that Alice Zhu, who is a young and incredibly bright woman, has actually credited this series as Stuart Sander. I believe Sander is to do with August Sander, but she's given herself a male pseudonym, which I think is an interesting thing for a young woman to. So this is a series by Stuart Sander, a la Alice Zhu. And I finish with a wonderful series of work by Behnaz Babazadeh. She's an Afghani-American artist who graduated in New York in 2012. Her work spans photography, sculpture and film, and challenges their Western conception of women in burqas with a series of materials found in a candy store. Candies in New York dazzled the young Behnaz on her arrival to America. She made a film, Burqaphilia, that featured custom-made latex burqas. In Afghanistan, Behnaz Babazadeh saw her own burqa as just merely a utilitarian garment that could help her live a daily life, and she found this a view diametrically opposed to the usual Western perception. She has made several exquisite edible burqa portraits. They are created from red fruit roll-up licorice, her favourite candy. The redness of thought she could be perceived as signifying lust, love, war and danger. This would open the lines of communication. Using about 500 strips of the fruit roll, she then climbed into the structure and awaited her portrait. This system was repeated with candy corn, sour gummy worms and gummy bears. Her body was a research object, and the ensuing discussion of how women in the Middle East are perceived has been both thrilling and intriguing. Her work continues. So I reached the end of my talk, and I think photography can be as thrilling and exhilarating and as confusing to the onlooker as it can be to the practitioner. The medium is interpreted in so many ways. Its manufacture, its value, its stature, meaning slip and slide and context change. But the more you look, the deeper you delve, the more there is to find. I want to quote Richard Avedon as my final line. All photographs are accurate. None of them is the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zelda. I think the audience might have some questions. So can Shivangi?
Has anybody got a question they would like to ask after my zip through the entire history of photography in 1 hour?
50 minutes.
50 minutes. Whoa. Has anyone got... Whoops. I'd really like it if there weren't too many questions, but one would be very nice. Well, that means clearly it's all been delineated and absolutely crystal clear on all fronts, which is excellent. Okay.
Thank you for the talk. I'm just wondering that can we think in the context of social media and the circulation of images, can we think reproduction of image as staging? Like I'm not talking about the subject, how is it staged or not, but the idea of reproduction itself and the circulation of image itself is staging.
I'm not quite sure I understand your question. Could you say it again? I'm sorry.
I'm thinking it like little loud and like in the context of internet, social media, the way images are circulating. So can we think reproduction or circulation of images as staged?
Well, I think what I've been trying to gently say is that everything is open to interpretation. So that anything you see on social media, anything you see in a newspaper, anything you see on YouTube, you have to make your own interpretation of what you see as truth or untruth. I think that is why I slotted in one documentary photograph into the centre of a very theatrical group of pictures, because I think we have to now use our own perceptions and contextual belief in what we see. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Is there another question?
Hi, good evening. Thank you for that talk. I think just going through the talk and comparing it with something like a painting, I was wondering if we impose too heavy a burden on photography to depict something that is so real. I mean, would we say that at the point of creation itself, something becomes real because it emerges from the mind of the creator and out there in the real world, and it's for people to accept it the way that they want to, just like a painting or any other art form?
I think that's a lovely question, and I like the whole idea of what is real, what is reality, what is truth, what is untruth, what is unreality. I think in the end is what is in the eye of the beholder, what is in the mind of the beholder. So I think, again, it's a very similar answer to before, that we all have an idea and have preconceptions, and I think what is really interesting now is that we can break down our preconceptions and be much more open to what is there in photography. I think photography can shoulder a great burden of representation.
Thank you.